MAWA for inviting me to come to the university today. Had a great day there. Yes, it's an honor to be here, and thank you all for coming tonight. I am going to give a little bit of a preface to my images, and I'm going to pull up some images right now. Recently to pull out some old favorite books, and was reading Slaughterhouse-Five. So I just wanted to share a moment of this with you. Billy Pilgrim had become unstuck in time. Billy is spastic in time, has no control over where he is going next. The trips aren't necessarily fun. He is in a constant state of stage fright, he says, because he never knows what part of his life he's going to have to act in next. So the slides I'm going to show you are a bit spastic in time. I've decided in these, I think our experience with a lot of visual images right now is spastic in time. We see everything digitally, small, often, and completely ahistorically and out of time and out of context. And I'm a big believer in context. I'm also a big believer in conversation. I'm happy to see people are here having conversations with their hands. But I wanted to just invite anybody to interrupt me at any time while I'm speaking tonight. It's going to be quite informal. I'm taking the spastic time barrage image approach here. I've put a ton of images, by no means all of my work, but a large selection going back, as Tammy so kindly pointed out, all the way back almost to 1992. I cannot believe what has happened, that I've been making work for when people say you're making art for 25 years, I feel like I'm 25 years old. Sometimes it seems impossible, you know, that the time collapses. And yet lots has changed, and I've changed. My life is entirely different. My worldview is not entirely different. I'm still symbolically using means of production that have been stereotyped as domestic for years. When I began doing that, it was with some degree of irony, to be honest, and now I'm a mom and a housefrau a lot of the time, and a lot of that lens that I had has completely shifted because I do have a lot more dishes than I ever used to do, etc. So it's a different perspective, and I have time for questions. I've always been interested in art as this conversation that involves a lot of questions. And a lot of my work comes from this place of wanting to ask questions that I know don't have answers. And also, I can't help it. They become like little burrs that get stuck in my brain, and there's usually, the inception of projects is usually conceptual for me. I think it is. I think I'm having a thought that I've never had before, and I get stuck on this idea, work out a plan for a project perhaps, and then it goes into my hands, and then it evolves, and then it usually takes on a life of its own, and then I usually have to step back and reassess and realize that it's maybe not what I first thought it was going to be or what it was. So anyway, I'm going to start with this spastic barrage of images. Usually, some of the language that keeps repeating have to do with accumulation and repetition. This image I've chosen as the first image is from a show that just came down a couple of days ago at the Tom Thomson Gallery in Ontario. And it is a show that my dealer Paul Petro curated. It was his first foray into curating outside of the gallery, outside of his own gallery. So it was a really exciting thing for him. And it was a complete honor for me to be exhibiting alongside, meshed in with the fabulous Melanie Rocan, who most of you may know or should know because she's brilliant, and one of my heroes, Joyce Wieland, and there was also Christine Flug, and so it was this really nice combination, an honor and a thrill to be a part of, and just the way older works were mixed with newer works, and in the context of these other artists' works, gave me a completely different perspective on things that are old and familiar, and I feel like I'm totally done with. So it's like a real gift. It was a gift to have this configuration. In my work, there's three different areas that I'll kind of talk about that all kind of mesh and bleed in together. First of all, the kind of handwork, knitting and sewing. I am an obsessive. I was saying to some students this today, if I was a chain smoker, I would be constantly doing this, but I'm not. So instead, I usually have something on the go with my hands. I find it grounding. I find it just keeps things real for me. This is a piece I made probably 20 years ago that became a little bit of my mantra, that wool equals bronze and time does not equal money. Can return to these thoughts later. And if anybody wants to throw in any comments, they can. I see knitting, as Tammy said, as this way of recording time. Well, you didn't say recording time. It's partly a gesture of recording time. I'm interested in physical property and, for your benefit, why I love knitting. The process of repetition, I feel like it's time warping. Arthur Kuntler, a writer, talked about this notion of bisubstantial thinking, which is my ultimate ideal state to get into while working on something. And for anybody who doesn't know what I mean by that, it's that place when you're engaged with something that requires all your concentration, like driving on the highway, and yet it's familiar enough that your mind can become more lucid. And I feel like when I'm engaged with things with my hands, that's what can happen. Time expands, my thoughts become more lucid, less linear. And I love that. I feel like when I can get to that place, it is, an amazing thing, just for my own self-indulgent means. I like that there's an implied function. I like the utilitarian possibilities, and that becomes part of the reading. I do approach it always as a sculptural medium. I feel like it is, for me, it is a language that is part of a conversation. I am not precious about any material practice. I feel like it is all the same. It's what's behind your intentions. If you can be clear enough to identify what those are, and sometimes that's a big stretch. I'm interested in pattern. I'm interested in having like a work ethic. I am the daughter of a retired Presbyterian minister and a woman who taught kindergarten for 40 years. So being productive, having something to do, not wasting time, were all kind of core values in my upbringing. And I've always felt that there was this kind of productive procrastination if I could keep my hands busy. I feel that textiles embody empathy in this way because it is the first thing other than the touch of your mother or a mother that you would probably experience, a blanket being put on you. So there's a kinesthetic empathy that occurs when you see a work that has been knit. I think it's, particularly in a cold climate, everyone knows what that feels like. So I use that. I like the shift from the public to the private, that it feels like it's a task that shouldn't be done in public or at artist talks. But no, it should be. But it feels like it's something intimate that becomes public, and I've always been really interested in that it's portable. And rebellious critique of capitalism, you cannot make things knitting. That, you knit a pair of socks, you pay $40 for the wool, right? You don't, it's nothing that exists in any kind of relationship to our current economic understanding and our consumptive models. And I think those are really rich things about it, really rich, that you can take those materials and twist them. And I use them as sculpture, that it is all thrown together. And in this case, not only the material of the wool over this is called Capitol, and it's the Capitol building in Washington. But the ball itself, where it came from, becomes this kind of precarious orb. So there's this covering, this knitting as sculpture. And there's also a part of my work that is in collecting. It's pseudoscientific. I've always been an accumulator. As a child, my mother sewed all the pockets on my clothes shut because otherwise I would come home with a pile of treasures every day. And what she didn't realize is that it would manifest in the ways that it has as in my adult life. But that it's that I pick up shiny stone just on Main Street today. I can't help it. It's what I do. But what that means to accumulate things when we live in such a disposable moment, right, where everything is dollarama and you can get anything and it's gone and it's so wasteful and it appalls me so deeply and offends me so deeply, and from that place comes the interest in saving, redeeming, turning something that's crap into something sacred. I love it. And so this is an example of early work, as well as the kind of hand work that I do. I've always drawn, fill sketchbooks, and for a long time I drew on maps. I saved maps. For 11 years I worked in reforestation. I've personally planted over 1 million trees. Again, a love for repetition. But these are some of my old planting maps that then I would do cut blocks and then draw on in these mandala formations before I even really knew what a mandala was, long before the mandala coloring books swept the planet. So this goes way back. I started making these mandala forms also with reclaimed objects, where I would recommodify things that I would find in garbage and hand stitch them into these big plastic configurations. There's also smaller pieces, but it's a difficult thing to photograph, this piece, because it's all been sewn, every object is sewn into plastic, and it's very shiny and reflects light terribly. And or this is a mandala that's directly on the wall, where everything is a categorized thing that I have discarded. Found, like, I used to live on Toronto Island for a long time, and these are all, every morning I'd go collect cigar filters that would wash up on the beach till I had, I don't know, 5,000 of them. This is from a series of poetry translations that I did in the 90s, where I would create alternative alphabets out of various things, some that I'd collected. This is from work socks retrieved from a tree planting lost and found, that I would collect all the work socks and re-sew them. This is an Anne Michaels poem, and I kind of transform them. This is a more recent piece called the Cumulus Nimbus Cloud, using all bottle caps. And I have been, since I can remember, collecting other people's discarded things that have been started and then abandoned. I recently divested my collection of weird knitted things that were people, they knit a sweater and they're obviously their first, or maybe their only, and one sleeve would be this long and one would be short, and they couldn't throw it in the garbage or unravel it, so they give it to the Goodwill, and I'd buy it and save it, and I don't know. This is a Louis XIV chair cushion that I'm stitching on top of and painting on top of, because all of this time that somebody else invested, and anybody who makes anything by hand knows not only, when you're doing something, your life goes into those things. What you're thinking about, you put on a sweater maybe, if you're a knitter, that you made while, around the time your dog died, and then that's all you think of when you wear that sweater, so you don't wear it or you give it to somebody else. There's a history within these objects. This is also collected. This is a fairly recent piece, I think from a year ago. This guy's going to be the star of a new video I'm making. They're all made out of Tim Hortons cups that I collected from an alley behind my house. It's a piece called Wild. And this was the Christmas edition. Maybe some of you recognize your Tim Hortons cups. And then there's a kind of performance aspect to my work, sometimes intentional and sometimes unintentional, that I'm interested in duration and in ritual. And sometimes this involves collaboration and working with accomplices. This is an image of the images I'm going to show tonight. This goes back, earliest image, from a performance that I did on New Year's Eve in 1992, called Torching of Time, where I made 365 objects out of paper mache in my studio, and then in the middle of Front Street in Toronto on New Year's Eve, burned them over a 4-hour period in a performance. And it was great. I had a clean studio on New Year's Day, but there were all these, and I had a whole lot of musician friends of mine and dancer friends who were part of it, and we read the news from each day of the year as we would burn the objects. And it became this really beautiful blending of personal, political. And this is a piece I did in 1995 called Newsflash, Madame Defarge, Eat Your Heart Out. I sat in a window on Queen Street West in Toronto for the month of April 1995, and for 8 hours a day knit the headlines from the 3 Toronto daily papers. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because I was on display, and it was also physically hard. And I worked on a video with I collaborated with a friend of mine on this thing called a rock knit video, this very fast-paced, sort of sexy knitting video. And that was in one window, and then I would sit in the other, and I built this false floor, so it looked like I was being buried in the yarn. And I would just sit there all day long knitting the newspaper headlines. And people would come by, like thousands of people would come by and yell at me, or they started bringing me gifts, like I was this shrine. People were bringing me bags of remnant wool, or taking off their shoes and showing me the socks their aunt made them, or this woman came by every day, baked me cookies, and art student for Olka wrote me this beautiful poem, and it became this really bizarre, amazing thing. And in the end, there's this blanket that is 23 feet long and 9 feet wide that contains all of the news from that month. And it's a bit of a time capsule, as well as the news items. If I had time at the end of the day after I'd finished the headlines, sometimes they were short. I never liked the Sun media so much ever in my life as I did that month, because somebody would have, the Globe would have these paragraph titles for articles, and then the Sun would be like, bang! But I'd knitting people's birthdays or my mood, and so it's, again, this blending of the personal and the political. And for those who may not know Madame Defarge, he's a character from A Tale of Two Cities, who would sit by the guillotine and record heads that were lopped during the French Revolution. So it became, the piece was called Newsflash, Madame Defarge, Eat Your Heart Out. This is a performance that I did a few years back I think it was 2010 in Kejimkujik National Park. Called Nature Repair, where I spent a week every day, 8 hours a day, with this custom repair kit I made, going out into this gorgeous national park and repairing nature, putting band-aids on things, repainting leaves that had turned brown. I would paint them green, sew holes in leaves, stitch up bark that had come apart, and everything I used would be biodegradable. But it was these gestures of futility when presented with this opportunity to do an environmental work. So I just felt that it was a gesture of care, and many of the things people never actually even saw. People would happen upon me as I would be doing it, have these interesting conversations. I've had this kind of parallel career for years that I'm not as involved in anymore, of collaborating with contemporary dancers and choreographers. It came from having roommates at university who were dancers, and then going from making sets and props and working with them to working with some of the greats in Canada. So this is Peggy Baker and her late husband Ahmed Hassan, and I worked with them on several projects. But it's sort of been this side secret life that I've had. And what I found with a lot of the public work that I'm interested in this public conversation. So a lot of the larger projects that I've done in public, because they're so labor intensive, have become performances in the most mundane way that you can imagine. Just by virtue of the fact that I'm out in public doing these acts, making these things, and then people want to have a conversation with me about what I'm doing and why I would be doing that. And it's great questions. And I forgot I even threw this. This is another big part for me, is community, my sense of place, my environment, my relationship to nature, but the immediate community. And then what happens is all of these things kind of smash together, really, to collide in my work. And there's a bit of a blur between those things where this is from a piece called The Invasion, where I spent a winter every day casting concrete frogs. I made 4,000 of them, and then they invaded the city of Toronto. I had a sponsor, a secret sponsor, who gave me 300 two-part epoxy tubes, and I hired a friend of mine who was an actor to be a scientist and talk about the diminishing wolf rock population. Then we took them and invaded the city. But that was one where it kind of gathered people. People became involved. And this is sort of before the conversations of social practice were really happening back in the early 90s. This is a piece I did in 2000 called Casting Off, where I invited knitters to make a square with a ball attached with a date that was significant to them from the passing century. So everything in this is a date from sometime in the 20th century. It was sort of my low-tech millennial project. There were so many high-tech projects going on. But interestingly enough, this was before Facebook. This was before even a lot of people were using email really regularly. So I had to use radio stations and postcards to get that information out. And I had, I think, about 500 people send me these squares, and they were so incredibly moving. Yes. Did you make one?
Yeah, I saw it right there.
Oh, did you? Oh, how exciting! Show us your square.
It's right there.
April 14th, 1985.
It's the day I learned to knit.
Oh, that's great. That is so great. Thank you so much. So I made this scrapbook that I don't know if you ever got to see the exhibition. You did?
I have to reach through to see it.
Oh, how amazing. Okay, well that's so awesome. Well, I made the scrapbook and they made copies of them so people could look through them, and I asked everybody to write a sentence about the significance of their date. And some people wrote political things, assassination of JFK, Kristallnacht, the extinction of the passenger pigeon. Some people wrote like incredibly personal, heartbreaking things of diagnosis of disease or passing of death. But like the vast majority were immigration dates, wedding dates, and birth dates, I felt like, but mixed in with this real rich combination. Influences of my life, my mom and my daughter. So I was busy having a life as an artist, and then at 42 decided to have a child, and then again at 45. So I am still in the throes of small children. And my mom with my daughter, I don't know why I threw that one in there. Okay, so I'm going to show a bunch of things kind of quickly, because I've already been talking for quite a while. This was the first gigantic bit of knitting I did. And it's called Memorial. I knit this 16-foot work sock, and then I took it and I draped it over public monuments and statuary around downtown Toronto to give it the. I was spending a lot of time up in the north and driving across the country because of tree planting, and there was all these objects, the big jumbo icons that are along the Trans-Canada, and people love them. The people who live in those towns love them. They love them in a way that they don't love the Sorrel Urtag sculpture or the Henry Moore sculptures. They love these things. And so I was interested in what it is. It's true, and it's funny, and it's true, and it makes you have to think about that, right? Like, what is the difference? So people like big, and people like little. And anyway, so I started doing this kind of heroic knitting. I made these giant custom knitting needles with dowels and plumber's tubing, and I started making these pieces that gave me really great shoulder muscles. This is the second one. It's called Big Big Mitt. It was attached to a hand-sized right mitt that you can't see that's down about here by an idiot string. And I also I liked the way, when people lose a mitt and it gets left over the side of a fence. So my intention at this point was, I was more interested in showing work outside of gallery contexts at that point. I thought, I don't need the institutions. I don't want to be part of that. I want my work to be out there. Intuitive Power Plant invited me to show those pieces, and then I made this piece for the Clear Story at the Power Plant, which is a 23-foot tall lumberjack shirt with thinner plate buttons. And then I stopped with the big. I was like, I don't need to make these big things. But then when my daughter was born, I found that some of the reasons that I started doing the big knitting was that I had this big, amazing, I could work on my big, huge knitting at home, and I could pack it in a garbage bag and shove it in the corner, and it wasn't toxic, and it was, it was portable. So it was very, very pragmatic in a way. And I sort of decided to revisit that when my son was little. So this is this toque, and what I'm interested in is that really masculine architecture that it's in, and the dialogue between that, and trying to create something that appears weightless, appears like it has just been windswept into the room, even though the pom-pom weighs over 50 pounds. And the kind of playfulness about that. So this is another series that I did, that I began in the early 90s. It's called Cardigan, and it's a cardigan for a giraffe at the Metro Zoo. And I was waitressing at that time, and there was this woman who used to come in all the time, and she would have her 2 dogs with her, and they had matching leather jackets to hers. And I thought it was so perverse and so extremely bizarre, and it fascinated me. And then right around that time, I also was asked to take a friend of mine's daughter to the zoo, and I got out there, and I was overwhelmed by the weirdness of it, because I hadn't at that point been into a zoo in so long, and I was a little horrified, but also kind of intrigued, not only honored to see the animals, but intrigued by the aesthetics that were there and how mediated the experiences. The polar bears inhabit a Lauren Harris world, nothing that resembles the Arctic. It's this very bizarre kind of experience they try to create for you. And so that, I started this series of animal garments, animal apparel, I called them. And then in 2004, the Metro Zoo invited me to show them, or a curator invited me to show them as part of an exhibition there, which was very weird and kind of also awesome. But there's the balaclava for the rhino, who looks perpetually depressed, and the work socks for Patsy the elephant. As I was invited to do this, I expanded the series, and I made them specifically for specific animals that were there. Poupée, who was the matriarch of the orangutans, got a very flashy, glittery Sex and the City inspired sweater, and Charles the gorilla got something. It's a giant heart. Anyway, this is Cozy that Tammy mentioned earlier. It was made from about 1,000 recycled sweaters, all in the same color palette, because using the monochrome, I feel like, emphasized the texture more, as opposed to making it a crazy quilt of massive color. I hand knit all the architectural details, all the borders around the windows, and around the edges of the buildings. I had custom buttons made. It's made in 6 pieces: chimney, sock, roof, 4 walls, and used airplane industrial Velcro to hold it all together. It's on Toronto Island, which is a community where I lived for 11 years. It's a very unique community. It's been gentrified in the years since then, but this was the house that it was for. And I chose the house because it was that archetypal kid-shaped house. It's the only one like it, and it was also in a state of disrepair. Looked like it needed love. But always my intention with this piece was that there's with it and without it, was that the house would leave home. It was to me as much about homelessness as it was about home and the place. And when you have one in the conversation, there is the other. And so this was installed behind the Eaton Centre in a very busy park, which is now quite different than this, but surrounded by glass and concrete, and a park that was frequented by the homeless of Toronto. And so I had to have 24-hour-a-day security, and it wasn't enough for all that long because of it, because it killed my budget. And then this was, it's got to have a couple other lives. Museum London put this up on their front lawn, and got it, and it snowed. So, in taking my own logic to its kind of extremes, I made that all out of the remnants of Cozy. I decided for an exhibition purpose, I would have photo documents of it, but how do you get that texture? How do you convey that actual sense of the physical object? So I created this, it's called the Untitled Domestic Interior, and it's my little, oh, and you can't see it in here, there's a kind of hand-knit fur-lined teacup, which was my nod to Merritt Oppenheim. Some of my other collecting, I have probably done 2,000 drawings on paint chips. I haven't done this now in years, but for years I would collect paint chips and then draw on them. I think it would be my fantasy job to get to name them. But I also I went through a time where I was painting my money and spending my money. Partly performance intervention to have a conversation with people. This is a batch that I did. The first batch that I did I was in the Paris studio, and before I had gone to Paris, I'd been in India for 4 months, and I arrived in Paris, and everything was so beautiful that it kind of disgusted me, and I felt like making graffiti, and it was making me really angry. And then I thought, okay, I just need to make things even more beautiful for the French. So I started painting their money and spending it, and I would get to have these really interesting kind of moments with people when they would see the change I'd given them to a waitress or somebody in a store, and they would surreptitiously slip it into their pocket rather than into their till, or they'd look at me like, did you mean to give me that? And so then I've continued doing that both in Canada and the United States, working too. This is just a couple details from a series called A Small Collection of Dependable Objects. There are about 30 of them, all varying tweed and collected tweed jackets for a while. An installation called Dark Roots, which was part of a large series of works I've done with trees, but this one was in 2002 for the 50th anniversary of the Stratford Festival in Ontario, where I turned this 150-year-old maple tree into a birch tree. It's kind of like a Maud Lewis birch tree, though. It's very crude in a way, and yet it played with perception. People would walk right by it and say, "That's the biggest birch tree I've ever seen." Not really paying attention, but I liked that I could have that moment. Chain of Fools, this is called. I couldn't part with my audio collection, so I started knitting them, and this is part of there's a whole series of work, but I'm just showing two. That one's called Chain of Fools, this is called Scent Spin. This is also made of audio tape, and it spins just with air currents off the turntable. In 2004, I was the guest artist at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and got to teach there, which was a real treat. And I was teaching in this building which was called the School of Human Ecology. It had been formerly the Home Economics School, and I was a guest invited by them, and the sculpture department, a cross-disciplinary course, and decided we were going to do this. I was going to do this installation with my students on the facade of the building, and so this is called Fembom. And all of the students who were students in this building hated the stereotype of being in the home ec building. They resented it, they hated it, they felt like nobody knew what was going on in there. So through conversation, this is how this piece evolved. We started using, there was a lot of construction going on, we started using construction materials and trying to externalize all the things that went on in the building. They had a fabulous quilt collection, so the roof are quilt squares. This is all construction fence, orange construction fence that we dyed, recycled fabric, all in shades of pink, and wove it through. So I was learning from my students' weaving processes. The pink insulation foam made the big buttons. It kind of became this interesting thing, and I have to tell you, the administration hated it. They hated it so much. First of all, they told me I wasn't allowed to call it Fembom. It was post, this was 2004, but they were still on Amber Alert, and they were really offended that I would call it that. And they were like, what if somebody Googles it? I'm like, they're gonna get a porn site, it's great. They'll get this instead. But they were totally offended about it until the American Sculpture magazine wrote about it. And then now they have a large frame print in the front lobby that you see as soon as you enter the building. This is weird. I put this in, Ron. I wanted to show you the roof angle. There's a beautiful lake behind. And then I was invited to remount it for Nuit Blanche in Toronto. And the strange thing about it was only up for 4 days in Toronto, and like 1 million people saw it. It was crazy. Whereas in Wisconsin, probably a few thousand, beyond the people who were in the building and helping with the project. This is also a collection. For almost a decade, I collected the barcode off of the UPS code off of everything I bought. So this is a map of the US that had the words trust in it, because George Bush was telling everybody fight terrorism by shopping. And all the money sort of kept screaming at me from the In God We Trust on it. And when I came back to Canada, I wanted to make a companion piece, so I made the beer cap map of Canada, which is full of lovely iconography. This is a piece I did in Ljubljana, in Slovenia, but it's a part of a series. I did a whole bunch of these. I've been collecting lace doilies for years, rescuing them, because each one of them represents hours and hours and hours of work, and there they are, 50 cents, 75 cents. So I can't resist them. It's kind of one of those things. And I have done a few different versions of these trees that I cover in lace. And some other tree installations. And trying to bring some of that into other format. This is probably, it's much bigger than it is on the wall here. Pieces, this is part of a series of homes that I've lived in. This is my current home in Guelph, Ontario. It's called Red Brick Classic, which is what the real estate agent, or the real estate ad said for it when we bought it. And this piece is called Ionic with Zippers. It's an ionic column that has 2 5-foot zippers plus a couple of sections. This is made of upholstery foam that I made to friction fit on any telephone pole. So I can take this piece anywhere and just snap it on, zip it up. And so I have a whole photo series where I like to go photograph it in construction sites. Because in the town where I live, this is the most beautiful agricultural land. And in the time that it would take me to knit one of those small models of my homes, an entire subdivision seemed to pop up. And I started thinking about, temporality, but also about what lasts. And none of those homes are built to last. 2016, there's no standard for Energy Star. It's an option. Development makes me nuts. Anyway, so the column seems to be this symbol of something that might last. I don't know. This is a piece called Overgrown, all mostly sewn, but every flower in this has something in it that is rescued, that I've found somewhere in a garbage or recycling bin, so that from a distance they become, this is I did a few different iterations of it, where it becomes almost like the William Morris wallpaper, but up close when you actually would be with one of these. It's things that have come out of the garbage. Okay, this is Return Shift from 2010. Again, the doily has come back in different ways. I started, this is a couple pieces from 2 years ago called Emission Omission. Actually, it's from 2012. And all of the flowers on this plume of smoke are made of the bottoms of water bottles, or 4-liter Coke bottles. And I just started accumulating these or other plastic bottles. So, and they're all beaded in the centers and then sewn onto this industrial plastic. And I started using the doilies with acrylic resins to make sort of more solid forms. This is a piece called She's Come Undone. It was in the first image I showed you. I don't know if it's the result of being a parent or the result of getting a little older, but suddenly I started finding myself drawing tangles and messes and things coming apart, rather than I was feeling so disinterested in anything heroic, monumental, but the messy was more appealing. And then it became about these tangles. There's so this is a piece that's kind of from that same time, but it's from 2000. Those are both, it's 2011, called Unraveling. Things are not as they once were, where the CN Tower is being kind of either taken apart or knit together by a bunch of gray squirrels. And this is from 2012, Strange Music, an image that I was drawing a lot. It's, this is, that these messes would come out of things. This is my husband, Colin Couch. I live with this incredibly beautiful tuba. He's a carpenter these days, but he's an orchestrally trained tuba. And if we have, we might have some time. I have a series of videos that I did in 2012 that all are about the coming apart and the coming together of things. And sort of it was the first time I was returning to a time-based medium. And in the process of this video is, I think, like 13, 14 minutes, as Colin plays this beautiful tuba, slowly, as he's playing, the tuba becomes encased in the gray yarn and silenced. Initially I conceived this piece along with a couple others with these ideas that were quite solid in my mind. Colin experiences pretty severe depression and shuts down musically when depressed, and so there was kind of that narrative going into it. When it became the piece, it became about something entirely different, which is, I just love, and it's called Shiny Heart. His playing is extraordinary on it. He riffs on Goldberg Variations 25. And then this is another 1 hour piece that is usually shown so that Robert Kingsbury, the guy in the image, is full size, but I knit him this kind of 70s superhero one-piece suit. And then he goes for a walk from the outskirts of Guelph out into the country. He goes by these like kind of crazy, fabulous places, and as he walks, and he's the most relaxed guy, I'll try to show you a clip or two from it. He's the most relaxed guy, and he just unravels this thing, and slowly, it's all heading in one direction, the whole hour, that slowly he travels and he moves out into nature, and the thing becomes more and more athletic, and then finally, we find him out in the middle of nowhere. And I had this idea, well, this was a piece to me that when I was thinking about it, I wasn't thinking gender, I was thinking of transition and transformation. And then I started working on it. We went through all these processes because I had this really clear idea. I wanted it high def, I wanted it silky smooth. I had to hire a Steadicam operator who wore this suit and did this moonwalk for over 4 hours kind of thing. But Robert, after I started watching it in editing, it felt like it was really about something else. The piece is called Road Trip. And I realized that other than in Greco-Roman art or in homoerotic art, you never really see images of men. Men's bodies, and men not doing something stereotypically male, and yet there's this kind of interesting thing that goes on. He becomes Discobolus at a certain point, moving this big ball of wool around. He becomes Jesus in this little, it's this kind of weird road trip. And then this is the third of the series. It's called Ravelry, and it features Andrea Nan, who has been my dearest friend for almost 25 years. She's a choreographer in Toronto, and she sort of is caught in this perpetual spinning where she's unraveling her own garment overhead. So I knit a garment for her where she could do that, and she's in a chair spinning, and if there's a moment I could play that. So in 2012 I was invited to do my first permanently sighted piece, and after years of doing kind of temporary, kind of ephemeral intervention, I was quite thrilled at this opportunity to be able to do something permanent, and maybe it is a product of my own mortality ticking away that I was really excited to have this opportunity. So this is called Before Flight. It's 23 feet tall, Indiana limestone and bronze, and I had to work with a number of collaborators, obviously, on this. I had to have this pillar custom made. And originally I drew it shorter, but they were afraid. It's at the University of Guelph on the main road as you're coming to the University of Guelph, and they were afraid people would try to throw shoes and basketballs into it. So it had to become taller so that couldn't happen. And so there's the bronze nest on top. But it was an amazing thing to get to work with the main stonemason here. He's one of the best in Canada, but he's married to my roommate from university, so I've known him for years and years, and it was this opportunity to work with him, and I'd like to do more. And then this is a piece called The Stack. It's at a music space in Guelph called Silence, and there's, again, the doily plume and about 1,000 plus audio cassettes make this sort of metaphorical vent for all the creative action going on inside. And so over here at this side, you see what there's audio cassettes. It's on the roof and it's also inside. And it was supposed to be just a temporary thing, but has become a permanent thing. Or is permanent until it degrades, I'm not sure. And this is a piece from 2015, again, working with the doilies. It's called Overcast, and making this cloud, because I'm hoping to try to cast this in a version of this sort of thing in bronze. And I've been working for the last 2 months, actually, every day with my friend Annie Dunning, who's another Guelph artist, who's in the process of doing this bronze piece that we've been getting ready, and then I'll be trying to transform crocheted stuff and knitted stuff in it. I don't know. Anyway, this was at the opening of THB in Hamilton, and they chose that space for there was some performance elements, and everybody kind of performed under my big cloud, and it was amazing. For the last 3 years, I've been working on embroidering, something that I have just sort of I'm self-taught at. I found a box of vintage photos outside of a photo studio in London, Ontario that were being discarded. I had them for a bunch of years, didn't know what to do with them. And then slowly started putting them in places in my studio, and I was trying to draw with them or paint with them and different things, and then I started stitching into them, and it just felt right to create these little conversations. So I've probably, in the last, most of them, they're all standard kind of portrait studio sizes, 8x10s, 11x17s or 14s. A lot of them have been hand painted or masked out, and I've probably, I don't know, I haven't counted, but I'm in the last couple of years I've done well over 60 of these kind of images. But spending time with the images, I tried to be respectful, but also let the photos tell me some stories. And it felt that the slow process, I don't know what the marks are. Prison sentence, cups of coffee. Anyway, most of them are not planned. I started copying them all so that I could look at them and potentially plan first. And then I found it was better if I just took the photo and started working into them. And it's amazing because some of these photos, like this one, is a collage of 2 photos. It probably, pre-Photoshop days, probably a family didn't have a photo of these 2 people who were a couple together. So they've taken the 2, and then this studio would have photographed this, but there's still the ripped bits, and they're quite amazing. I just love them. So this is just a small sampling of these stitched photos. There's these gorgeous women, and then these are a smaller series that I've done with antique baby postcards. And these ones are just, they're kind of a meditation in a way. And then I've started trying to collect up old imagery, and so grouping them. So this is all couples that have been stitched. It's kind of hard to see. So other things that I'm doing these days, I feel like I'm in a bit of a transitional phase. I'm involved with this project called Mend, and we'll be participating in May in this thing called the Mending Lounge, and it's a bunch of artists who are coming together, organized by Catherine Walter, who has the company Felt in Toronto. So she commissioned me last year to design a patch, and it's kind of this notion of commodifying mending. So this was my patch I designed, and oddly enough, it looks just like one of those little denim patches that you buy, in a package at, I don't know, any store, but it has the needle on it. But she had to have them all made because they're all hand silks. I recently just completed an Artist in the Community project, which is something I've never done before, but the neighborhood that I lived in I've become quite involved with. And with my friend Annie Dunning, we did a project called Mapping the Ward, and the Ward is our neighborhood in Guelph, So one of the parts of this project was we made this map of the neighborhood, and then people interacted with this map in various ways, writing on it, drawing on it. It became a kind of feature. We held a couple of printmaking workshops where we invited people to create lino cuts of their favorite locations in this neighborhood. And what is so amazing here, we brought in certain artists to mentor who are professional artists, and people who'd never done anything like this before. Sort of 13, we had one 13-year-old, the rest were adults. But you can't really tell which are the professional artists here, can you? But the book is full of these amazing images. We worked with Publication Studio in Guelph. And then each person wrote a little story about this. Plus we held several storytelling workshops where we got people to interview other people and tell stories and recorded them. We made this and published this beautiful little book called Mapping Morton. Came out in the fall, and that's from our launch. Annie and I also designed, we held a silkscreen workshop where we designed this flag, a neighborhood flag. We're kind of a little neighborhood pride. And then we held this amazing event. And it was a map that people could kind of keep adding stories to. So people, it's kind of this project that just keeps on going. Another thing that, this is a really recent project that I've been working with choreographer Lynette Siegel, doing this piece called A Simple Task, and we've performed it a few times now and are doing different variations on it, where basically I'm just knitting and she's just unraveling. And we're doing it in front of these audiences, different places. And so this one, she's actually not. It's a dress rehearsal at a dance festival that occurred in the fall. But it's this kind of thing that is kind of evolving and taking its own life and is current. Okay, so I thought we're at an hour now, and people are probably getting restless, and I'd love there to be some questions. And what I thought I'd just end with are some troubles that I have. And we all have, probably. It's the list of the lack of lists. Not enough time, not enough money, being 53, and you got toddlers. I got an 8-year-old who's a rep soccer player. Who would have thought in my life I would be driving 4 times a week to watch a bunch of girls play soccer? I wouldn't have. But it's what I'm doing. And I have a studio. My husband just built me a beautiful studio. There's an image of it in here. But it's filled with crates. I have nowhere to work because I am paying for all this work that I've made. I'm lucky. I have a dealer. Does he sell my work? No. I'm 53. I make the same amount of money I made when I was 29 or 28 as an artist. Nothing, I've moved up a couple categories. I've had chance. I feel really lucky. I'm lucky. People have written about my work. People have showed my work. But I can't live. I can't pay my bills. I can't, so this is a list of jobs I've done. There's 30 of them here, and I realized it doesn't include all of them. Some of them are even just within this year. I've been painting houses again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. As I said, I was a studio assistant for 6 weeks, just leading up to this, filing, piecing wax, and then using a grinder for days on end. I've worked, done all these different things. I worked in the film industry for a while when I was in Toronto, worked in reforestation for years, done a whole range. This is my little studio. Because of what I found, I had a studio. I moved to Guelph. Life is cheaper there, which is really good. But I couldn't get to my studio without paying childcare. How can I justify that? So we tore down a garage and we built the studio. My husband built this, which is unfinished. It's going to have a living roof, which is fabulous. But I have, this nice space, and then there's no room to work in it. Unless I want to pay somewhere else to store my work somewhere else, which is, I think, what I've got to do. Okay, so some of the troubles also that I have is, this is a piece I showed earlier on called Entitled Domestic Interior. I had a grad student call me up, say, "Wow, so cool. You're in Vogue. You're in Vogue magazine." I said, "I'm not in Vogue magazine." So I went, replicated entirely my work.
Wow.
Now, would that sort of thing have happened without my permission if I was a painter? I don't know. I don't think so. Okay, I've got a problem with yarn bombing. I don't want to offend any of you if you're yarn bombers, but in this weird kind of way, it's great, and in this weird kind of way, I feel like it undermines 25 years of my work. I'm not the only person knitting out there, but because things are so ahistoric, and because of things that I have done, I feel like, you know, there's no consideration to the there's no conceptual consideration. There's no, a lot of times, not really aesthetic considerations. A lot of the work is not really done with care. And a lot of it ends up feeling like it just, you know, like I'll see the worst exhibit of yarn bombing in our local town, and people say, hey, did you do that? And I'll feel like crawling under a rock. But you know, like, so that's a problem. Like, it's really shaken my foundations a little bit. When I started doing the work that I'm doing, nobody else was doing it. And in a way, I'm really excited that so many people are working in textiles now, and that it's become more accepted, though it isn't as much as it should be. It's, you know, to me, it's never, I've kind of ignored it, like that's not my conversation. I know what I'm doing. It has nothing, you know, I don't need to be part of that hierarchical conversation because it interests me not at all. But I keep getting dragged into it. 25 years down the road, I'm still getting dragged into it. People still just want to, you know, people talk about my work and want to call me the knitter. And it's not with, wow, your work's interesting. It's dismissive, and it's offensive. And at this point, you know, it's, anyway. And then how do we keep fresh? How do we keep playful? How do we keep engaged? How do we keep doing it when all these other things are going, stop. Your parents were right years ago when they told you should have gone to medical school, you know. So I always have loved this quote, you know, that every child's an artist, but how do you keep being one? How do you keep things fresh? How do you keep it being exciting? How do you keep engaged when there's all this other mundane stuff that keeps kind of harping at you, you know? And that's this is Cassiopeia, and she's the best. She reminds me to play every day. These are my kids, and I get to make them really fun Halloween costumes. It's one of the few things I can feel really good about having a gray-haired mom. And I've been working a lot with their classes, getting in with kids like them who are so tech-based. But I just did this is a stone carving project, a soapstone carving project I just did with a whole bunch of 10-year-olds recently. And it was the most satisfying thing to put dangerous tools into hands of kids who've been bubble wrapped. And, you know, and say, I got some Band-Aids here. And nobody's gonna lose a finger. And they're so proud because it's something real. It's not plastic. It's, you know, when they put a little bit of the dubbin on the stone after, they go, ooh, you know, like thrill. And it's real. And I just did this encaustic project also with a bunch of kids because like, yeah, bubbling hot wax. As long as there's a teacher on board with it who's not going to tell on me, or who, you know, the teacher, it's great. She said to the principal, we're doing a special art project, but she didn't tell anybody what it was going to be because she knew it would get shut down in these, you know, litigious kind of times. So anyway, that's the last image I'm going to show, which is not my work. But that's sort of where I am right now. Would anybody like to see a couple minutes of a video?
Yes.
Okay, so I've got, I'll start with this one here. This is from Road Trip, and I'll fast forward it through a couple of sections. So this is basically the pace of the whole thing. He walks and he unravels. And as we filmed, we had a whole crew on the sidewalk with our Steadicam operator doing his moonwalk and the safety people and me yelling, okay, faster, Robert, faster, the whole time. But he goes through this part of the outskirts of town that feel timeless to me. The outskirts of most towns now are exactly the same. They're all Home Depot and Staples and IKEA, whatever. But this is like the outskirts from another era. It's this one strip that I absolutely love. And here, I'm going to jump it forward. Here we go. Wait a minute. I'll go back. This is the section I show in the slide too, where he comes along. There's certain people who see him. He's starting to make the ball.
Did you sew them into the suit?
Yeah, I did. It's funny, with all of these pieces where there's unraveling involved, I had to knit them opposite to how I would normally make something. Normally if I make a sleeve, I start from the shoulder and work down. So these I had to do it the opposite, so that there would be that logic to it. And I made several test sleeves because we were testing light, we were testing timing. I wanted it to be a long piece, but I didn't want it to be, 5 hours. And what I found that is so interesting when I'm showing this work is I thought it would be one of these pieces that exists in. So here it starts to get a little more physical. I thought it would be one of these pieces that people would just walk through, acknowledge it, walk away. And I've shown it about 5 or 6 times, and in each place they've had to bring in chairs because people end up sitting and watching the whole thing. And I find that really kind of amazing. But because I find it oddly compelling to watch him do
I
this.
keep expecting a whole bunch of little kids to start following.
Yeah. You know what, actually, no, we cleared, I wanted it to always be this kind of people-less once he got into the natural environment. So there's a couple moments where there are some people, but mostly if there's people coming around, we stopped, or so I'll fast forward again until he's further down the trail. There's this one great moment where there's this whole flock of Canada geese that takes off, and I was wanting it to have a bit of a kind of like retro, out of time look to it, so we had to wait for a day with kind of really diffuse light, and then kind of push the color in a little bit, and he's starting to get a little tangled here. Way along. Yeah, there's a guy fishing at one point. And then it goes kind of how you expect it's going to go, right? Like it's always heading in this one direction. Everybody wants, you have to, the end is he comes to the end, and finally there's a moment where the yarn can no longer cling to his body. Oh, there's the moment. And he finally just, beautifully steps out of it and keeps going and keeps unraveling. And so, oops, I didn't mean to do that. So that's one of the pieces, and I won't show. It keeps coming back. Yep. And we were trying to make it sort of seamless. If you want to turn the projector, this next one it's a bit of an odd little moment you're going to have here, where Dana has to help me out. Is this one I shot it in portrait, so it needs to be turned. Where'd it go? So this is, and this is how this one would be shown, sort of. I chose to do some very super macro details. So basically, this piece was made also opposite, and we unraveled it and then edited in reverse. So slowly, and then also sped it up because I didn't want this to be quite so durational as well. And then Colin spent 16 hours in a recording studio trying to match up finger and sound and timing and breath because he didn't want it to be contrived. Okay, whoops, I'm messing around here. I'm going to take you further in here.
Was this the first collaboration piece you did with your husband?
Other than the two kids, yeah. Yeah, I am lucky. He is remarkably supportive of whatever I'm doing. This is a lovely section here. He caught the one moment in it where he opens his eyes, because for the whole thing, the intention was his eyes be shut for the entire piece, except for the very beginning, they're open. And hang on here, oops, so then it gets into this top part, which what was lovely about this part is it started to feel like the sounds were moving, coming out of the top. Okay. All right. Thanks, Dana. All right. If anybody has any questions, I've kept you here more than long enough.
Presented your trouble. I saw that and I thought, here's a young man, fit, sort of, and he's just undoing all your work and putting it into a ball. And I thought, what is that saying? Like, to me, what does that say? What is that saying? And it's done so quickly, because I'm sure, how long did it take
Yeah.
to knit it? And then when I'm seeing it happening right in front of me, is there is a frustration when I'm seeing it that is happening.
Okay, interesting. Somebody wrote something about that in the Atlantic Art Review, and a man wrote that was this critique of how I could, saw it as that a man undoing my work. But honestly, when I conceived of that piece, all of those three were conceived of as self-portraits of me, 3 different states of my own mind, basically. And then I needed people to stand in. And Robert, who is my collaborator there, he actually filmed the film of the Shiny Heart video. He's a composer and an amazing human, who is, I've collaborated on a bunch of things with now. And initially, I was going to get his sister, who is also close to me, to be in it. But when I tested a little earlier bit with her, I was like, I can't have her walking down the road naked, because then it becomes about something totally different. So for me, it is about the transformation, the notion of the journey and letting go of things is what it feels like. Because things do come apart, and that should be okay. Really. I kind of, so I don't feel that, but I respect and I find that interesting.
But also, if you think about it, is that if it had been a young woman doing that, the freedom isn't there to do it for her.
No, there isn't.
And that too is another question you ask, is like, why would she have a male doing that if you're talking about self? So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, similar to you, it's like, well, yeah, I probably would have been much more problematic.
Mm-hmm.
But because the freedom isn't there.
Yeah, and it isn't, right? But then when I made this work and stepped back from it too, I kind of felt like it was about all that it became, as I said before, about this other thing. And I feel like when you sit and spend time with it, it's actually it feels quite a spiritual piece to me. And that's sort of the journey that I was interested in. And it is, when we're close to things, it's hard to sometimes see things. And I'm so very close to the person I used as the stand-in in this. So I kind of have this, it's an interesting read though. And one, that I don't feel myself because of how I relate to it, but I think that's also interesting that it brings up that. And I've been doing a lot of this, taking apart, the piece I did, I've been working on this performance called A Simple Task with my friend Lynette. Same thing. It's this interesting thing. We've done it 4 times now, and we're going to do a different version of it. Again, I can't believe it. But people weep when we're doing this performance live, where I am knitting, and she's taking apart. And people get really emotional about her wrecking my work, even though this thing I've made is of non-function. It's just this long blue stripe. And sometimes when we've done it, it's been really long, sometimes shorter. But people get really upset and they get really anxious about it and find it very emotional. And Lynette and I, both feel like our intentions with it need to just keep it as mundane as possible. It's just 2 things people are doing. It is a fact of life. Every day of my life, something I do gets undone. I clean up a room, it is messy in a minute. I make a meal. That is what our lives partly are, right? A lot of what we do is left to nothing. And I feel like burning a lot of the stuff I've made, frankly, and it's fine. It would be fine at this point, And it doesn't mean that I don't love it or care about it. But I feel burdened by it as much as I love it, to be honest. And there are things that I greatly treasure even more than that. And usually they're things that other people have made. Interestingly enough, which is also a good question, right? Like I'm not super precious about the things I made. And I kind of want to be less precious, even, is where I'm at right now. Yeah.
I think they have problems finding institutions who may want to collect your larger work, like you want to invest in it and
Well, that is also an interesting question, and something that, as knitters that are here, I love to, when I'm making something like socks, I like to make functional object hats, sweaters. I love wool. I love wool. When I make big sculptures, I don't use wool. because there's archival issues with it. Most institutions are not equipped to deal with any natural materials, and there are serious archival concerns around even having them in some institutions that I've gone through, where what if something is in it? Heaven forbid, right? Which it could be, something living. Moths or eating mustache or I have some work in collections, but not as much as I would like to. Because I'm at the point I'm going to be, I'm actually in the process of trying to donate it to collections, and that's because I don't want it anymore. Yeah.
Is some of that the same, judgments and hierarchy around different materials? Because I see lots of things being produced now that is less permanent in terms of its construction or its materials than some of the natural materials that you might be working with.
Sure.
And so things that are that I've seen even as part of exhibitions at the Winnipeg Art Gallery that is literally falling apart.
Yeah, and
the technicians are struggling with what to do with this long term.
Eva Hess's whole body of work.
And so but is part of that too the same some of those issues around craft material versus other materials, or people artists who are perceived as craft-based artists versus other artists, so yeah. I think there's all kinds of
I think there's your.
I think there's all kinds of agendas and judgments and things that are layered onto that are hard to pull apart. Whereas other things are happening in terms of, I think, greater opportunities and openness around, and loosening of boundaries and definitions in some places. I think in other instances it's not. And I think a prime example of that is what you're pointing out in terms of collections and,
Sure, and there is a perceived hierarchy, and a really strong one. And I've been painfully aware of that, and I always have felt so. Like who cares? That's your thing, not my thing.
yeah.
But I had people, when I was having a solo show at the Textile Museum, one of my friends said, "Mistake, don't do it. Don't do it. They'll never let you in the AGO now that you've done that," kind of thing. There's those kind of conversations go on. And I have always thought, come on. Joyce Whelan's knitting is hanging up in the AGO right now, so it isn't completely void, but some of them are legitimate concerns. Sure, like if you do not,
But they're not.
but then some of them are not as
Sorry,
well.
I just got angry. Like there are the textile museum where we have we sort of have a collection for the Costume Museum of Canada, and there's people preserving and caring for natural fibers that are hundreds of years old.
Yeah.
They're able to take them in.
Yeah.
They're able to deal with this issue of bugs before they put them in with the rest of the historic collection. And if people, whatever, sorry, I'm trying to but if the major institutions were willing to hire experts in that, then we would see more work like yours
But they're
in major
not.
institutions.
They're not willing to. They're
Sorry,
not willing to. And even the Textile Museum of Canada that has this collection and preserves all those old things, they don't have any contemporary work. They don't have the room to store it. They have the means to protect when things go in, and when I've shown things there, they go in freezers, deep freeze, and they do all before because they're really worried about the cross-contamination of things. They're really particular about it, but they don't buy. If I gave them something, they might, and they'd take it, and I might get a tax receipt. But if I'm not making that much money, what's a good tax receipt to me anyway? It's a question. It's a question. No, don't apologize. It should. It's a problem. It's.
If you're saying that you are not selling and you're not making any money out of this, how are you managing continue to work, because it costs you money to make the work.
Yeah,
Are
I
you
don't,
getting grants for that, or
in
do
general,
you self-pay, I mean, or you're self, you know, like,
independently wealthy, no.
no, but you're finding the money, you're funding those projects by yourself up front?
I fund a lot of my own work because I'm always working. Like, I'm always working on something. Sometimes I get grants, but the reality of the grants are problematic as well. There are so many grants out there for emerging artists. There are, as you go along through the hierarchy of the grant system, which is also a hierarchy, young emerging artists, not the perpetually emerging artists, who are the people who've had to either are becoming kind to art later, or people who, because of their other circumstances, haven't had the opportunity to do those big projects, right? So haven't got to move up through the hierarchy, and the competitions become harder and harder. So I do get some grants, but not as much as I did when I was in my 30s.
Well, then how come
Honestly.
we can't tap into, for instance, I mean, this is a ridiculous example, but for instance, the shark in formaldehyde and stuff like that, which was funded really by private money, huge private money. How come we can't tap into that kind of thing? Is it because we're not trying, or we haven't thought about it? You know what I'm saying? Like, it seems to me, like, I understand your problem, we all have that problem.
Yeah, and that's why I'm
But-
raising it. I don't think it's unique to me.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there is huge money which has gone into art and has funded some pretty bizarre art. Like the whole Saatchi thing.
Mhm.
And yet we don't tap into that at all in this country, as far as I can see, at least I'm not familiar with.
There aren't those mega there are collectors in Canada, but not kind of the level of a Saatchi kind of, really.
Well, I mean, aren't there, or do we just not know that they're there?
I don't know.
Are we not just convinced? I don't know.
I don't think
It's a
they're-
question on that, because I think that's where the problem is. Like that money, I mean, you can only do so much with, grants and funding it yourself and hoping for a sale, which is never going to happen, because it's not happening, it hasn't been happening for years.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's all I wonder.
And, I teach sessionally, but again, that's what I've been doing for years. I teach sculpture sessionally, and I love it. This year I have no courses, suddenly. And there could be ageism creeping into it, because if they're only bringing in a certain number of people, they want to have, they want to have, when there's a slightly older demographic among the faculty already, they don't want somebody like them. They want to bring in someone who's going to offer the students something different, right? So, I don't know. I have some teaching lined up again coming up soon, which is good. But it's not something steady. I didn't get into the kind of permanent academic field because I didn't think I wanted that at an earlier stage, and now I'm sort of past the kind of potential for that.
Well, the conundrum there is if you had more of a career as a paid, regularly paid something, then you wouldn't have had time to be an artist.
To make all the work I did, yeah, I know.
So
It's true.
It's a constant conundrum for
Yeah,
people.
It is a conundrum, and it's always going to be that kind of conversation, and it still is worthwhile. Like, it's still, even though it's not easy or whatever, I feel like it's so worthwhile. I feel like I have had something in my life for a long time now that gives me meaning, it keeps me curious, keeps me, and sometimes the curiosity is because I'm angry about something, but it keeps me interested, and I feel that there's a richness to that, and it's something real, right? That has been what my life has become, and everybody has times. I feel I've always kind of felt my best work is still ahead of me, and I hope that that's the truth. But I feel like I'm in a position right now of needing to shift, because some of those financial decisions that were okay earlier are not so okay right now because of just where I'm at with my life with having an 8 and a 10-year-old. You need braces. And things like that, right? I feel like, yeah, things like that are also just a part of reality. But the good thing is, art will still be there for me when they've moved out. You know, it's a wonderful thing about having that, because it's not something that's going to go away. And trying to, you know, it's one of those things like other things. How do you keep it alive, and how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep the faith in those good things, right? That keep you excited.